Welcome to Unleashed, the podcast where we redefine leadership by focusing on what truly matters, the people driving change. Change leadership is about guiding people through transformation in a way that inspires them to embrace change because they believe in it. Whether you're a leader looking to foster a culture of growth or someone eager to break through barriers in life and business, this podcast is for you. Now our host, Wendi.
Welcome to Unleashed. I'm Wendi, and I'm your host. Today's guest is a trailblazing civil engineer and leader who has broken barriers throughout her career. Eileen Vélez-Vega made history as the first woman to lead the Puerto Rico Department of Transportation and Public Works, bringing her expertise in transportation, resiliency, and emergency response to the forefront. A passionate STEM advocate and two-time cancer survivor, she continues to inspire the next generation, especially Latinas, by proving that perseverance and leadership can drive meaningful change. So Eileen, it is such a pleasure to have you on Unleashed. Welcome.
Thank you. Gracias. And it's an honor to be here with you, Wendi.
Yeah, Eileen is coming from you're recording from Puerto Rico today, yes?
I am. I'm at my house in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico.
Oh, my goodness.
But it's funny because I'm not from Guaynabo. I'm from a really small town called Sabana Grande. So a lot of people sometimes ask, are you from the metro area of Puerto Rico? I'm like, I live here in the metro, but I grew up way on the other side of the island, which is completely different. So it's important. They're different places. Yeah. I invite you to come and see it someday.
Love it. I love Puerto Rico. I worked with duty-free shops there, and it's just a beautiful place to be.
Agree.
Well, Eileen, clearly you've had a remarkable career journey from civil engineering to becoming the first woman to lead the Puerto Rico Department of Transportation and Public Works. Would you just unpack your journey for us? How did you get here?
Wow, it's so amazing, right? When you grow up in Puerto Rico, and I grew up, like I said, in a small town. My mom is a teacher. My dad is a sales representative. It was a humble beginning in a very small town. So I went to rural area schools, and you would think the opportunities were limited. But my mom had this vision and this constant reminder for me that there were no limits. And if I worked hard, I could achieve anything and everything. And I remember her teaching me in English class about the Challenger disaster, Neil Armstrong, and Helen Keller, and even Thor's hammer. She was my English teacher. And in these courses back then, this is more than 30 years ago, they would give you so much history in your English class that I guess that's where you start understanding that the world is a bigger place and that there's so many possibilities. So from this very small town, I went to the University of Puerto Rico at Maya West and graduated from a civil engineering degree. And I started getting involved with the Society of Women Engineers, which is kind of how you and I meet, because we meet through one of my sweet sisters, Wendi, as well. And so with them, I started traveling and meeting more of these pioneering women. I did an internship at Walt Disney World. I did another one at NASA. And at NASA is where my eyes open at what I could do as an engineer, because I was an engineering student. And also what my place was in the world as a Latina. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But graduating from the University of Puerto Rico, I went to work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the research facility in Vicksburg, Mississippi, traveled the world doing research in airfield pavements. Then I went to work with Kimley Horn and Associates in West Palm Beach, Florida, in the aviation group. And then I led the Puerto Rico office with Kimley Horn, which I relocated to Puerto Rico. And it was a life dream to come back to the island. I was in the U.S. for about 11 years and came back to the island. I've been back for about 11 years now. And from working in the aviation world, I started getting very involved in professional organizations, nonprofit as well. When you do your work with passion and you love what you do, people notice and they start talking about you in areas and places where you're not in. So after a colleague and an event that I was in talking about engineering and aviation, she asked me what my future plans were. And I told her that she worked with the government, and I told her if I ever worked with the government, I would love to be Secretary of Transportation, because that's my specialty.
Really?
Transportation. Yes. And I had told that to my mother as a young girl, not really understanding what that was. And I had never been in state government or politics. So I never knew. How do you get there? So this woman that hears this maybe 5, 6 years ago. She was in the transition team for the new governor, for Governor Pierluisi's new administration. And when they were looking for someone for the Department of Transportation, she mentions my name and says, I'm going to ask her for her resume. November of 2020, when we're all in the pandemic and everybody's in shutdown, I get a call from her. I had not spoken to her in years. And she says, send me your resume for consideration for the new Secretary of Transportation for the island. I was shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? I can't do that. I love my job, the press, the politics. I can't do that. My family. And she said, you said that to me once. And we joked. And I was like, we were at an engineering conference. We were drinking. It was after hours. But I was serious. And she's like,
you got to be careful serious. What you say when you're drinking. I'm just saying.
You got to be careful what you say out loud. The universe will conspire. God will make sure that it happens for you. And it did for me. I did an interview with a committee, 4 persons that were doing the committee interviews for the talent search. And they told me, we loved your interview. You're a wild card. Nobody in politics knows you. We're going to put your name for the governor to interview you. And the government interviewed me, the governor, and the new governor. And he said, well, go home, talk to your husband. You're probably not going to sleep tonight, but we will talk tomorrow. I didn't know. I was like, does that mean that he wants me to do this? That was December 4th of 2020. Next day, I accepted the position. Next day, they get me with a PR communications coordinator to get me ready for the press conference on Monday, December 7th. And on Monday, December 7th, they announced that I would be the first woman leading the Puerto Rico Department of Transportation and Public Works in the agency's 107-year history. My life changed completely. And I was like, wow, this was fast. And I never would have imagined this was in my life. And I'm so grateful and so honored. And it was such a big deal for me as a woman in STEM and an advocate for STEM. But also, you work really hard through your career and through your life. And it doesn't matter if you have very humble beginnings or if you don't have a lot of money in your family. Education, perseverance, being able to say yes and be adaptable to change and learning. And I believe that's all been part of my career. And self-initiative. Sometimes when you tell people what you want to do, you have to tell people what you want to do, because when an opportunity arises, they'll think about you. And I think I've been really good about that in my life. So a lot more stuff happened, but that's how I got to where I am today. And I just completed my mission with the Department of Transportation on December 31st. So on to a new adventure now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I love how your beginning really started with encouragement from your mom and creating that belief system that you can do it, and almost giving you permission to unpack what it is that you want to do and a belief system that you can.
Yes.
So,
agree.
I look at how much you've done, and I just personally, I don't know about you, Eileen, I don't believe in luck. I think it's being in the right place at the right time, and, having strong intentions. So it sounds like you have intentionally put yourself in places where there was opportunity, or in some cases, did opportunity just come to you? Was it a combination of both?
You have to be ready for it, because sometimes opportunities do come your way, but you have to prepare. And I had a mentor in the Army Corps of Engineers, and I went back to see them in 2016. They invited me to be a speaker for Hispanic Heritage Month. And I was so excited because I hadn't been back to Vicksburg in 10 years. And I met with him, and he said, you are the perfect example of preparation, timing, and opportunity. And those 3 things meeting together, because he says the opportunity has been there, but you've prepared. And that's what we have to do. We don't know sometimes why we're going to take this class or this course or this training or this certification. And sometimes we don't want to go somewhere because, like, I'm busy, I don't really want to do that, but let me go to this workshop. And then you end up meeting an amazing colleague or person at that meeting, or that certification or program helps you for your next step. When I went to Disney to do my internship, I was Mickey Mouse. That's what I did for a whole summer in 2000. And I
don't think you're supposed to tell people that, Eileen.
Well, I was Mickey's friend. I was in the character and entertainment department. That's what it's called. And my supervisor, Carlos, was from Puerto Rico, and I told him I wanted to shadow a civil engineer at Disney because I was an engineering student, and I did. And that opportunity, that experience on my resume got me my next summer internship. That was the summer internship I always wanted to do at NASA. When I asked my supervisor, David, at NASA, why he picked me, he said, you had this experience at Disney World that was so unique and so different that I was really interested in having you as my intern. And I was like, wow, I would have never thought that Disney was going to get me to NASA. And I always tell students about internships and preparing for internships and doing your best job when you're there, because that might influence the rest of your career. I mean, right now, I have that experience in my resume, and it always catches people's eyes, and they ask me about it. They're like, what you do at NASA? That's amazing. I was there for about 2 years as a student. But you have that powerful experience in your resume and in your life, because it also tailors a lot with what you do later on. But I never would have thought that starting as a Disney intern was going to get me there, and the other things that have come out of that in the rest of my career.
Well, and I love your story so much because I don't know that as kids, I would never think, this is who I want to be, like that big of a job. And how interesting is it that later in your career, that's the job that came to you? I was talking to one of my mentors yesterday, Bruce Herskovitchy, and he's just a brilliant executive. And he said, Wendi, here's the thing. Here's what I'm learning. You determine your favorite project. Like, answer that question first. And then answer the question, what's one of your favorite experiences as a child? You put those two things together, that becomes your purpose. And that really hit me hard as I'm listening to your story, because it sounds like that happened for you. Yeah. So as a career woman, being one of the first, what has been one of your favorite projects?
Oh wow, there's a lot of them. But and it's funny how you say being the first. Being the first is always a little scary. It's a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
And we hear this a lot. I was at another interview and someone asked me, that is, when are we going to stop saying the first woman to do this? And I don't know, but at the same time, it's when you are the first one, the responsibility of being a role model and giving more opportunities and making way for others to have more accessibility into other positions that women were not in before, it's a huge deal. And so I guess when I started doing this, to me, it was like, okay, I cannot mess this up, because being the first woman, if I mess up, the scrutiny and the criticism will be more brutal.
Isn't that true? I never thought of that. Yeah.
But also, you don't want to mess it up for the next women that are going to go do this. And I have a young girl. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I always knew that other girls were watching, especially her, and other women in the industry, because there are a lot of us coming up into the industry, and there's more women in STEM now. It was such a big responsibility. So as far as favorite projects, and I can tell you probably a favorite project in all the phases of my career, but just talking about the last 4 years as secretary. Puerto Rico had many issues, or has had many issues in the past, and that was one of the interview questions that the governor did for me when I was there. He asked me, what does Puerto Rico need for the transportation, to improve transportation in Puerto Rico? And I answered him, there's a lot of issues in Puerto Rico with maintenance and planning. We don't plan, we don't maintain. We let a road collapse, and then 20 years later, we get federal funding to rebuild it. That doesn't work that way. And I'm a pavements engineer, particularly in aviation, but it can be applied to all transportation. And so one of my favorite projects as secretary, as just immediate past secretary, was establishing, again, a maintenance program in Puerto Rico for our roads, but also having the reoccurrence or the recurrent budget to sustain it. Because the thing is that when we got there was no money to do maintenance. What happens if you don't do maintenance at your house? What happens if you don't do maintenance on your body? Like if you don't go to the doctor, or you don't routinely check your body or yourself? Well, there's catastrophic things that can happen, right? Catastrophic failure, which was happening in Puerto Rico's infrastructure. So having established that with a budget that will come in, I mean, we established what we took from the previous administration, a project that they had that was kind of sleeping here in Puerto Rico, to have the electronic fines, traffic fines, that money, 70% of it redirected for the maintenance of roads. And also, how can we make sure that that budget is there continuously? And it's an electronic digital ticket that people now get, and they can pay right on their phones. So this changed everything. And from $3.5 million that I had, I started the job as secretary to maintain green areas. We ended up investing about $395 million from what we had there to what is now on road safety, on green areas, on potholes, on everything that was road maintenance. And it sounds very technical, but at the same time, this is basic. If we don't maintain an infrastructure, we're going to have serious issues on the quality of life of everybody. Transportation is key for us to have have quality of life. So that was one of my favorite projects there as secretary. I think that I left a legacy behind in the department that now the new secretary and the new administration can continue it so that we actually have safe roads and safe infrastructure. So that's one of them. There were many others, but to me, that was one of the highlights and my favorite things that I did, or my biggest accomplishments as secretary was that, and it was because we had to go back to basics.
Yeah. Well, and did that fit with when you look at your purpose? Because I know
Mm-hmm.
you're really passionate about mentorship, specifically with Latinas and
Yes.
also specifically women in STEM.
Mm-hmm.
So, how does your purpose play out in your everyday life? Uh, in your previous role that you say has just ended, and in your future going forward, what does
Right.
that look like?
I think that you always have people watching, and you never know who you're going to inspire next, right, with what you're
Mm,
doing. So after the secretary role was ended, I was asked to speak to a group of STEM girls. There's a camp for a whole year, or a program for a whole year of girls in STEM. And my daughter actually is one of the participants this year. And they wanted me to talk about my life. And they said, don't talk too much about the technical. We want you to focus on how you became who you are. Talk a little bit about what you do technically, but focus on the human part. And that's
hmm.
the best because
Yeah.
of all the accomplishments that I've had professionally, I've been able to combine it with a personal story, with a human part, because I'm an engineer, very technical, very strategic, very perfectionist and organized, but I'm also very empathy for people, and the whole part of like people have all their stories, like everybody has their own story, and having that compassion into what I do, and the kindness, because I was very very intentional about being kind to my employees, and I had about 3,000 employees, some that told me we had never met a secretary, we hadn't had the accessibility to talk to a secretary at this level. They had my number. If I needed something from their area, I would text them and talk to them. And they're like, we never had this relationship with the Secretary of Transportation. So they thought she's up here and I'm down here. And I'm like, no, we're all here working towards the same purpose. We're improving our island safety and traffic and transportation. So having that humane part and that kindness, and you can't look at people as just somebody to work and produce, and that's it. So to me, that human part is really important, and I take it into everything I do. So having the success in my career has allowed me to speak to young girls, to present at different conferences, to be a speaker, and to have a platform. So I want to make sure that I take my personal story into these places, because you never know who needs that encouragement and who's looking for a little bit more than just producing numbers from 9 to 5 and going home and that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I know I listened to your TEDx talk, and I was curious as I was listening to that, why, what led you to doing a TEDx talk? Why was that important for you to share your story? Because I loved, Eileen, that you didn't just share your professional story, you shared your personal story. And so that humanness that you're bringing forward really moved me. So what inspired you to share your whole story on a TEDx talk?
I've always wanted to do one. I thought that I would listen to them for my own professional development and leadership development. And I always thought it would be so great to do a TED Talk or a TEDx. That would be so great. And so one of my colleagues from Puerto Rico, she works for Veteran Affairs in Washington, D.C. And Veteran Affairs has a TEDx program. And they were looking for, they opened nominations for the new cycle. And she called me and said, I'm going to nominate you for this because I think you would be a great speaker. And I was like, oh, I always wanted to do that. And so she nominated me. The whole process took about 6 months from the moment that you get accepted, and then they do screening of what you're going to be talking about. You practice, and they eventually, or they did select me, and I was able to do it in November, I believe it was 2022, and I loved it. And it was called Change Makers. So how do you apply what you're living in a world of change, but also how do you adjust when changes happen? And this was great because we were inspiring veterans. And, there's a lot of veterans that are disabled and that need encouragement, and their lives change by doing something amazing and selfless.
That's right.
So to me, it was like, of course I'm going to do this. I mean, this is amazing. And I built more friends out of that. So I think that every time that I've done something amazing like that, you meet new people, and then I'm good about keeping in touch, and I have now friends in those areas that I would have never met otherwise.
Yeah.
So there's always that really amazing opportunity about expanding your network and not just being colleagues, but friends. And I got to say, that's one of the best outcomes of doing these new things.
Yeah. Well, and in your TED Talk, your sphere of influence professionally is, the ripple effect of you just sharing your professional experience is huge. You put that together with you sharing your personal experience. Specifically, you talk about 3,690 days since your reborn date. So unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, it's more now. I guess we could calculate them now, right? That was 2 years ago, so we have to add 365 by 2. Anyway, so so it's more than 3,000 days, right? But I started with that number because I'm an engineer, right? And numbers are important in our lives. It sometimes we feel that the numbers are driving our life because we depend so much on them for everything, for budgets, for designs, calculations, everything. But as an engineer, I saw it as a different thing. It was like, this number represents my life. Back then, I had been reborn for that amount of days. It's because in July 9th of 2012, I had a stem cell transplant, an autologous stem cell transplant. That saved my life. I'm a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with cancer on September of 2010. And back then, I was 5 months pregnant. With my first daughter, with Ana Isabel. And I had chemotherapy while I was pregnant. In December of 2010, my daughter was born, healthy. I didn't have hair, but she did have a lot of hair. And she was healthy and beautiful, and I was happy. And after I finished the chemotherapy, she was 5 months old. But after a year, 9 months after my last chemo, in February of 2012, I had a relapse, so a reoccurrence. And so I had to have a stem cell transplant because it had been so quick after the last chemo. And it was Hodgkin lymphoma, which is a curable cancer. You can go into remission. But it came back, and it came back pretty fast. My doctor got concerned, and we never spoke about death. He always said, you're going to live, you're going to survive, your daughter's going to be okay, and you're going to live until you're 80, and you're going to be an old lady, and you're going to keep working, and you're going to be amazing. So I believe him. It's like when my mom said to me, you can do anything. My doctor said this, I can do this. Yeah. And so, but things got a little complicated with the reoccurrence so quickly. So in July 9th of 2012, when I had my stem cell transplant, they say that's your day 0. So you start counting your life from that day forward. So I have 2 birthdays. I have 2 birthdays, one in October, and then July 9th is also my second birthday. And I actually celebrated, and my husband has to bring me gifts, and it's a big deal. Because that's when I was born again. That's what we call it when you go through a stem cell transplant. And so that's part of the story. It's like I had to stop working. I was leading multidisciplinary projects. I was in Florida. I went to Moffitt Cancer Center. That's where I had my transplant. My doctors in West Palm Beach and in Tampa became my family and my angels. And I always keep in touch with them as well. They follow me through social media, and they see how my daughter has grown. She's 14 years old now, and she's my miracle child. I had the cancer since 2009, but I didn't know. I was very healthy. But when I got pregnant, which I didn't know either, that the pregnancy accelerated the cancer, and that's how they found it. So my doctors have always said, your daughter saved your life because you did not know what you had. But they checked some other previous test exams and medical exams, and they said it was here, but you were so healthy. Nobody would have found this at that time. Your pregnancy and your daughter saved your life. So she's my miracle baby, and I can't have any more children. She is my miracle child because of everything that happened during the pregnancy and afterwards. That I share always my story about that adversity, but it turned out to be a blessing. It was rough, and it was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in my life. And my mom as well. She was my caregiver, and my husband. They always said, we had cancer with you because we were there, and it impacted their life so much. And they also had to have therapy and help emotionally after my cancer. So it was a family event. You know, it was something that affected my whole entire family. After that, you see life completely different. You want to lead more intensely. You want to do things not because you have to, but because that is your purpose. And having a platform like being the first women's secretary and all these things that I've done allows me to also connect to other cancer survivors and caregivers, because they've asked me to go and speak at conferences, but just telling my story gives them hope. Yeah. There can be a happy and successful life after cancer. There is hope. And there's a lot of medical advancements now. Even it's been 12 years for me already. So I would have never thought when that happened that this is where I would be. And I've been on remission for 12 years. First women's secretary and all the things that I've done. And my daughter's 14 years old. This is also something that is important. I think that my purpose is more that than anything else. I just didn't know it when that happened. That was going to be the purpose of all this. But yes, I'm very grateful that I get to speak to you healthy, and having that experience behind me, that I can prioritize my life and see the silver lining, right? And now, just to be able to share. And I don't mind sharing, and I don't mind the questions, because it's and I don't cry anymore when I talk about it, even though some days I do. Yeah. But just makes you stronger. Yeah.
Well, and I know, Eileen, we talked before I hit the record button that you are wearing teal today.
Yes, I am. So I'm wearing teal in Puerto Rico today. January 31st is when we commemorate Riza. Riza is a mother who passed away, and she had cervical cancer. And so we have a very strong foundation in Puerto Rico to commemorate and honor her life, and also create awareness of cervical cancer. So today is the day, and I have a lot of really great friends that are helping and that are fundraising and advocating for this organization. So to me, it was important to also support them. And it's part of our journey, right? We never know when it's going to be our turn. I already had my experience, but being able to talk about it and raise awareness and how women have to take care of themselves. And if you see something or feel something different in your body, you should get checked. Mine was a little ball right here that I was like, what is this? And it's nothing. I'm like, no, that wasn't there. And you have to be aware of the body, how it changes. You're the best one to know and tell the doctor what you're feeling. And if they tell you, no, that's nothing. Oh, yes, it is. You should be persistent and say, please check, because this is not normal. Yeah. And so we have to talk about it.
Good. Well, I love that you're open and honest about your experience. And I want to go back to something that you said about your purpose and how oftentimes adversity leads to innovation. And I know the first time I heard this was in the middle of COVID, and we were, trying to figure out how to oh my goodness, we've all reinvented. I mean, it's amazing how that was such a defining moment for so many people, and propelled people forward, brought people back. I mean, it was just a defining moment. And, one of my colleagues and mentors, Kurt Reinhardt, we were on the phone one day, and he just said, Wendy, with adversity comes innovation. And as I hear your story, that's really what I hear. So, as you look at the impact that you are intentionally making, specifically with Latinas, specifically with women in STEM, what is your vision? If you were to look back and say, here's the impact that I made, what would that be?
I think that by my story, other girls, especially girls in Puerto Rico, if she did it, why can't I do it? And also being open, like you said, about sharing your story. And the women, we like to share, right? But I think that sometimes, and I remember being told, you're too passionate and take the emotion out of it. You don't really have to do that. There is a way to controlling that and making sure that it works for you and not against you. So by being myself and being able to talk as freely and openly in these different forums, I think women and girls can feel better about being themselves, and I can be different. And being a Latina and a woman, being a woman is a superpower. And I think that that has to be told. And when I talk to girls about how I got it to be an engineer, and I did a lot of fundraising to do, like, for example, Space Camp when I was in the 10th grade. And I used to do folkloric ballet. And so I would dance. And I love that part of the artistic side of it. It doesn't have to be all square and just numbers and math and science. You can be a diverse person and have other interests and still like to dress up and put on makeup and put on jewelry and still be a great engineer, because I think there's such stereotypes into what women in STEM are, or even as Latinas, what a Latina is supposed to be, right? That when they see us being ourselves and comfortable being ourselves and being successful and being out there in the world, encourages them to be like, I can be myself. I don't have to fit the mold of what they say that I should be. So I'm very comfortable in my own skin, and it's taking years of just being out there and being brave to feel this comfortable. Also, when you mentioned it's strong support from my parents from when I was little, and my husband now, who's one of my best cheerleaders and supporters. And my daughter is very cruel. I think teenagers are very cruel. If you ask them, how do I look? Maybe be ready for what they have to say, right?
They'll be honest.
But, brutally honest. But it's another experience. Right now I'm a mommy, so now I'm learning in that stage as well. But I someday when I look back at this, obviously I have many more plans on what I want to do. And eventually I want to write a book and have like this tool to be able to go into spaces and present to women and other and young girls and share my story and have them be motivated and inspired, but also that they can be brave to do it themselves. And it's always hard, like I said, to be the first one or the only one. It's intimidating. So being very sure about yourself, even if you're afraid, and I'm afraid all the time. And I said this to the girls in STEM a few weeks ago. It is okay to be afraid, because a lot of the questions they asked in the chat were, how are you not afraid to be the first, or to go alone and live in the United States alone? Or aren't you afraid about the language barrier or the different language? Well, you have to study a lot and prepare yourself. I make sure that the communication part is really important and that I feel comfortable. And my mom taught me English and Spanish as I was born. So that was a blessing. Yeah. But you also have to study and prepare. And so I always tell them, I'm afraid. I get nervous when I'm going to speak at a big stage, or when I was going to have an interview with the press, or when I was going to go with a governor for a press conference. Of course I was afraid, and my hands would shake. Once I'm there, because I've prepared, I was sure that I knew what I had to do, and that I was educated and I was prepared and I knew my stuff, that whatever they asked me, I was there because I was a smart woman and I was prepared and I was best woman at the moment to do the job. But you have to believe that so that people believe it as well. And that part is hard. Sometimes we're harder on ourselves than us. Like, I could tell you how amazing you are, but to tell myself how amazing I am, that's not as easy. So having that impact in young girls and other women, for me, is important. So when I look back, I want to make sure that I did that through my story and through my mistakes as well, because we're not perfect, that other women can feel safe and I want to say empowered, because empowerment is many things, but they can also take the chance and be bold enough to go for it. So why not? If I did it, why can't you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I look at the word empowerment. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think there's so many people that sit back and wait to be empowered versus you're already empowered. And I love your story and your authenticity about fear, because fear can be a motivator, or fear can hold us back. I have a friend who is brilliant. Her name is Heather. And I mean, she is brilliant. She works at Disney, and she is unbelievable. And she has this opportunity to potentially speak to 1,000 people. And she just, like, it's paralyzing her. And I'm like, Heather, how do you let this propel you versus hold you back? It's an unbelievable opportunity. And I think so often fear holds us back. So what would you say to people who are allowing fear to hold them back versus propel them to do great things? Because it sounds like you've used your fear to propel you forward.
So if you are afraid, or if you're not afraid, let's just say that you're afraid to go do this presentation, like your friend. What are the possibilities of it going really well And what happens after? If it goes wrong, okay. But what if it goes well? What about that? You got to dream big and think like, okay, this is going to go really well, and all this is going to come out of that. So it's to me, yes, I'm afraid. Of course I am. But I think about what is the outcome of this? I mean, if doing something that amazing can just propel your life to something even better. And so you always have to think, I'm doing this because this is going to get me to the next thing that I want to do. And if you just stay where you are, well, you might be content. Of course, you might have a happy life and you might have an okay life. But what about to be amazing? Let's just do amazing things. And I tell my daughter all the time, because she's a little bit more shy, and I tell her, fear and shyness is really not going to get you many places. And she's in theater. And even though she's really shy, she's in theater and dance. When she's up on stage, she's amazing and she forgets. And then she has kept going into back for more plays, and they've selected her to do more plays and more things, and she's loving it. And I'm like, see, that first try, which is always the first time is always the hardest, that got you into something you loved, and you have this potential and you have this talent that you would have never known if you would have been so afraid that I don't want to do that. What if I mess up? What if I forget? Well, okay, then you try again. So not being afraid to fail is really hard, because we don't want to fail. But then if we don't try, we're never going to learn. So to me, as a little girl, and again, you have to have support and people to tell you that you can do anything, so that you're not that afraid. And I got to say, it's still my mom. But that initial time, that first time that you go for it, is the hardest one. Once you do it, you get this adrenaline and this I don't know, there's this thing about wanting more. Yeah. And I've seen how powerful it has been to put myself out there, to do these presentations, the wonderful things that come after doing something amazing, and as you know, getting yourself out there and being vulnerable. But the more opportunities I've gotten, the jobs have been more amazing, the significant roles, the places I've been in the world, the places that I've been, and the people that I've met. If I would have been too afraid and just stayed in Puerto Rico in my little town, I had never applied for anything and stayed in that little town, I would have had a very happy life and very calm life. But my life has been amazing. And it was because I was brave. And the fear, of course, but I think that when you're afraid, it means that you really care. And so that's how I see it. I care a lot, so it is going to be scary. But if I don't feel those nerves, it probably means that either I'm too cocky or too confident, or that I stop caring. So I still like to be a little afraid and a little nervous, because it lets me know that I care and that this is important.
Yeah. So that fear can definitely be a gift. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking back to the first time that I was giving a workshop. And as I was leaving, I found out that my entire audience was going to be French speaking. And in Montreal, I'm going, you didn't want to tell me this? And my director at the time was like, I knew it'd freak you out. So I didn't want you to know until like the day before you're leaving. I'm like, oh, this is great. Anything I need to know? She's
Love
like,
that.
You'll figure it out. I'm like, okay, big booth of translators in the back, you know, everything's being translated, 5-second delay. I have headphones on, you know, my PowerPoints are all in French. And I mean, the only thing I had in English was my book and my notes. So interesting. And I remember the fear that she looked at me and she said, so Wendi, here's the thing. You want me to go do it for you? Because I will. Or do you want to just figure it out?
For it.
And obviously, you know, made the decision to move forward. And I now have been able to speak in many different countries, 5 different languages. Exactly. I only speak English, you know. And so I think of that, you know, I call it my failing forward. And last year, you know, was really a year of, in my business, I'm going to do some things differently. And I will tell you, there are so many things that I did and I failed, and I went, okay, so let's do the next thing. And so that was, I call it my year of failing forward. Do you have, you know, it sounds like you, Eileen, have done so many things and you've been so successful. And as I'm hearing your story, it sounds like every single thing you have set out to do, from a TEDx to, you know, being the first woman as the Secretary of Transportation and Public, like all of these things, if you've said it, it's happened. Have there been any experiences that was a flop experience for you? And, you know, maybe you failed and you learned, and, you know, you made it okay to fail.
Right. And it's funny, my husband says, because I told him my next things that I want to do. And I'm going to restart my career again next week. I start another role. I start back in the private industry, and I call it, this is a new adventure. Here we go. And I'm hoping that it goes great.
Well, and it's a different mindset not being appointed, right? You've been appointed the last 4 years, and now being in
it's over. And now you got to go continue your life. I can't retire. I'm 44 years old. I have to go back to work. Unless I win the lotto, the big Powerball on Monday, then
then I think you would go back to work. You just seem like that person that's not going to sit back.
No, I can't do that. I get bored, and there's so much to do. I think that one of my motivations is that there are so many things to do. There are so many great things that we can do, even if we live a passive life. There are so many things out there for us to do and experiment and achieve that I want to do it all, but organize. Because the one thing I learned is you cannot do it all at the same time. You can do it all, but you have to prioritize when to do it. So, and I learned that mostly when I was sick. Because I was a new mother, and I had to take a break to get better and for my health to improve. And I wasn't the go-getter engineer for a while, for 2 years actually, because I had to pause my career to get better and to take care of my daughter.
Right.
And then I started again, and I came on reduced time, and then eventually I came back to full time again, and it's been successful. And I learned how to prioritize, but I also learned, yes, we can do everything and anything. Not all at the same time. So, and that's okay. We have to tell that to young girls, because sometimes the misconception is you go for it. You don't have to sleep. You don't have to take care of yourself. Don't worry about it. Just get it done. No, self-care is important. But I learned it the hard way. That wasn't me all the time. And I still can tweak it a little bit better. But so my husband says, whatever you say, you do it and it gets accomplished. And so I said to him something I want to do in the future. Really something out there against, like when I said I wanted to become an astronaut. I still have that. We'll see. Nowadays, it might not be that impossible. But I think that you say something, it's not just to put it out there and by chance you get it. Again, you have to work towards it. So you set a goal, and I wanted to become Secretary of Transportation, and really the opportunity came unexpectedly. But if you look back in the 20 years of career, I was getting ready for something that big. I just didn't know it. So you have to put it out there, but also prepare for it and be ready when it gets there. Because sometimes we say we want to do something. And I said no when they called me because I was afraid. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm not old enough to do this. The other people or the other men that have done this had maybe more experience than me. They were men. I was the first woman. I'm too young. I'm not in politics. I don't have that experience. And I psyched myself out of it. Like I was telling myself why I couldn't do it, or why I wasn't the best person to do that. After retrospection and talking to my husband and looking back and this person also encouraging me to do it, I was like, why not? I mean, come on, I can do this. And the imposter syndrome, and we all go through that, or sometimes we go through that. I was listening to a talk about the imposter syndrome, and it was Jay Shetty, and he said, Google yourself and see all that. It didn't happen by chance. You were getting ready. You've done some amazing things, and that's why you deserve what you have. It's the consequences of you working so hard. So yes, I have said things and they have become true, but I worked at it. And once you set your mind into something, you gravitate towards that, and almost everything that you're doing is to achieve that goal. And organizing it, and I'm good about writing everything down and making a plan, an action plan. You can vary from it. It's not always going to be perfect, but that also helps me because it's almost like a strategy game of, okay, so I want to achieve this. Where do I have to go? If I want to become an astronaut, there's a lot of things that I have to do, right?
Right.
Maybe learning other languages and having a really good body condition. There's so many things, but you do your homework. So I think that one of the things I'm good at is doing my homework. I do, and I prepare, and I look on what do you need in order to get to that. So later on in my life, and I don't know when, maybe my daughter has 4 years before she goes to college. And so I am starting a new adventure, like I told you, and I'm excited about it. But long term, I do want to speak at big events and have these amazing opportunities to inspire more women, but do it like I want to do that. I want to go and speak and present. And yes, the book thing is something that I want to do. It's because I've been to these events, and you get so powered and so inspired and so motivated. that I see myself up there and say, I can do that someday. Someday I want to do that. But we'll see. Yeah, that's one thing that's in the plan. And right now I'm going to focus, and it's also important, focus on what you have right now too. Because if you can dream big, but enjoy your life now as well. Because I know I have future plans, but I'm also focusing on what I'm starting next week and making the best at that. And I believe that being really good at what you're doing and intentional and present, the consequences of you getting what you wanted later on are better. The chances are better because we focus so much on what we want to do tomorrow and in the future. Well, enjoy today because this is what's going to get you there.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm focusing on is I have this new adventure. I'm going to do this really well. So eventually when I want to do that, it kind of is like the product of it, right? So yeah, enjoying the moment is not always very easy.
Yeah. Well, something, Eileen, that I have not heard you talk about is, and it may be an old phrase, I don't know, this whole work-life balance. It sounds like you're really busy. It sounds like you're really intentional in everything that you do. So how does that work in being a wife, in being a mom, and having this really successful career and having friends? And, you know, how do you do that?
Right. Well, I always say that we don't balance, we juggle. Because when you
I like
balance,
that. Work-life juggle is so much better, less pressure.
we juggle. Because what the balancing is, well, is my family, is my job more important and not my family? Not really. I mean, if you really think about it, your family is always going to be more important than your job, but it can't be down here because then they're going to never be successful. So I tell, and I tell this to a lot of the women and the young professionals that I talk to, is we juggle. You know, we constantly keep moving and juggling it around because, well, when your little girl or your daughter is sick, well, okay, well, you know what? Work is going to have to wait for a little bit. I have to take care of my daughter. But then when you have a big presentation, your husband helps you get the daughter to school or take her to dance rehearsal or whatever it is. And you constantly keep moving this around. And there are different priorities. You always are going to have to prioritize your life and your health first. That's the most important thing or nothing else happens. But again, you have to learn how to put it all together. And my husband has been a great support. I mean, he's amazing. Throughout these last 4 years as secretary, like I think we talked about this, I always wanted to take my daughter to school. And during that time, I wouldn't take interviews from the radio, from the press. I wouldn't take calls. It was just that 30 minutes with my daughter in the car, and she would know. And I told her, if the governor calls, I have to pick it up. And that was our deal. Okay, if the governor calls, then you can pick it up. But if anybody calls, you're not picking it up. So I did that with her in the mornings. And she was very strict about it. And so we took that time to talk and to listen to music. I know all her songs from the celebrities that she likes, the singers that she likes. And then in the afternoon, my husband would take care of her. And I traveled a lot. And when I traveled, my friends would help with her. And I would tell them, hey, girls, I'm going to go on this business trip. I need some help. And they would help me. And you need support, but you also need to plan ahead. And so that has helped, having the coordination and getting help as well. But understanding also that the job is always going to be there. But I'm her mom, and she can't get a second mom. So, you know, there are things, and being the first woman in that position, I told them, if there are days where I need to go pick up my daughter or go to a school event, or just leave earlier, I have to do it. And there hadn't been a woman sitting in this chair ever. So the chair has to adjust to the woman that's sitting in it. And that's how it was. And it worked out because there were boundaries. It was like my daughter is not negotiable, and that is okay because I am a mother first, and then I'm the secretary. So she doesn't care who the secretary is. She cares that mommy's there. So you have to be okay with that. And you have to tell your staff and your people, your team, and they have your back. Because when I wasn't 100% present, I would either have the chief of staff or the other engineers guide a meeting for me or do it virtually. Now we can do so many things virtually that it worked out. But you have to plan this. You have to have a good coordination. And it has worked out. And I mean, sometimes it doesn't always work out. Like you said, there are moments where we fail.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I failed. Of course I have. My God, yes. That's why you stay humble too. Because you know you're not Superwoman. You want to be Superwoman. But
you have superpowers and you are Superwoman. Superwoman may fail at something.
Oops, yeah, I might fail sometimes. But thinking about when I would say in the past 4 years, communication was really important. for everything, internally with the team, externally with the media, and with the governor, with the mayors. And I think that I want not failures, but I think things that I learned. Pick up the phone, and especially during times of emergency, because if you don't, the press will kill you,
Right.
and the legislators will kill you as well. So you don't want to deal with that. And there were moments where if I took too long to be proactive and communicate quick, that's when the biggest backlash came. And so having strong communication was very important, because I felt that when I didn't, or maybe things would take longer, or when I wasn't as proactive, those were really rough days. So communication was key, and knowing that if you don't do this, it's going to be a really bad day. It's going to be, and it's going to take days to fix it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you learn the hard way sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's trial and error in that juggle, and you kind of learn as you go. And I
Yes.
appreciate, Eileen, that one of the common themes that I hear from you is plan, 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 plan. It doesn't happen by accident. And you're right.
No.
The plan is not always gonna come to fruition. And yet, if you have a plan, there's something to fall back on. And so I just appreciate and am inspired by your intentionality to plan. So
Well, we can improvise a lot of things, but and also when you said having a plan and it changes, and you being okay, being flexible, there are
yeah.
things that happen.
Hmm.
And I always, when I'm speaking to groups, when I talk about my cancer journey, I start and say plan B. If plan A doesn't work, and the three dots, and then I go into the slides with the pictures, and I usually ask people, does plan A always work? And everybody always says, no, of course not. Well, then how do we react to it? How do we recover? And it's
Right.
okay. Maybe what we wanted was not the best, or wasn't the most convenient. This other thing turned out even better. But if we would have been stuck in that, this is what I want, and this is the only way that can happen, you probably will not get the best opportunity. So it's hard, because we don't want, our plan sounds so great. We want to keep it. We want to follow it. And if it changes a little bit, sometimes we get frustrated, and we get, we're not motivated anymore, or we don't want to do it anymore. At the end, when things come out good, you're like, wow, you know what? It was actually okay that that didn't
Yeah.
work out. But it's not happy. It's not the best. And when I was young, I remember not being accepted for an engineering program in the summer in high school. My friends were accepted, and I wasn't. And I was devastated. Oh my God. It was so sad. And I couldn't understand, why did I not get in? My grades are great and everything. And then I look back, and I'm like, that was important, because it taught me also character, and how to graciously accept that you're not getting everything that you want.
That's right.
And later on, things got, I did get accepted to other things, but I'm glad that happened, because you can't get too cocky and too
That's
sure
right.
of yourself that everything is just going to happen, everything's going to fall perfectly. It is okay to cry every once in a while, and it is okay to feel not the best at
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah, you bounce back, and you
And
appreciate things better.
And that creates resiliency.
Oh, yes.
That helps you as a leader to be empathetic, which is one of
Hmm.
the leadership characteristics that I would say, even in the last year or two, or maybe even since COVID, has really become an important characteristic, is this whole
Yep,
empathy. And if you're
I
not
agree.
failing, if your plan's always coming to fruition, how are we empathetic? Because we just don't understand when things don't go our way. And so I
Right.
think, that is powerful as a leader.
But you can tell other people, like you and I, we failed, and we tell others that's okay. If
That's
someone else fails and they come to
right.
you super sad and super discouraged, you can be empathetic, and yes, okay, let me listen, and I'll
That's
help
right.
you. But this doesn't mean it's over.
That's
It's
right.
okay. Look
That's
at
right.
me. I failed all these times, and it is okay. And it's good also. It's also a good lesson for our children, because as my daughter grows up, and she is, applying for more things, and eventually going to college, it will also help me be a better mother when she
Mhm.
does have failures, to let her know that it is okay. It's not over. It's not the end of the world. It feels like it, but it's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to just change directions here
Mhm.
for just a moment, just in light of this recent tragedy of
Mhm.
this American Airlines plane that crashed with the helicopter. Lots of lives have been lost, and I just want to say publicly, our hearts and prayers are with the friends and families who have lost loved ones. To have
Mhm.
you on the show 3 days later as an expert in transportation and airport design and infrastructure and safety, what is your take on this recent tragedy?
But it is a tragedy, and I believe we have so many. Our emphasis when we are in transportation, especially aviation, is always safety, and
Mhm.
the airspace is protected, and there's technology for us to have control in that airspace, and especially at an airport like DCA, right? So it is tragic, and it's also one of those things that you don't understand immediately when you watch the news. You're like, how could this happen? And this doesn't happen,
Mhm.
and we can definitely now do the research and the investigation and figure out what happened so that it never happens again. Because again, loss of life, and that is what we as engineers thrive for always, to save life, especially when you're in transportation, traffic safety, everything else, even if it's air or if it's maritime or if it's actual roadway. So understanding the causes of this so it doesn't happen again is going to be very important, but also the empathy of us and the message that we give after something like this, because everybody's wanting to know who to blame. But at the same time, the families that lost loved ones, right now they're just having to cope with the problem, to understand how they're going to live their lives after something like this, the fear that will come from them when they have to travel, or even the fear
Mm,
of some people that are watching the news right now
yeah.
until, oh my god, I have to travel, what if this happens?
Mhm.
And so the whatever message comes out now from the leaders, from the experts that are doing all these investigations, has to also provide that trust into traveling again, into the way that we are making sure that the airspace is safe, that the communication part with other aircraft, already active aircraft, is flawless, and it has to be flawless. There is no room for error. That is an area where there is no room for error. And as professionals in the industry, in transportation, we study those human behaviors and how human error can affect what we do, because we can design something perfect, but at the end of the day, there are humans behind it, and there are humans
Yeah.
users as well. So it is very sad. It is something that should have never happened and should never happen again. But I think that the way that the message now comes out of our leaders and our world leaders is also very
Mm.
important. And it is a little bit disappointing, I have to tell you that. As a Latina in STEM, listening to the messages out there are discouraging. And I think that when we should focus on what to look for or what happened to avoid it from happening again, attacking a certain amount of people or a race or a group of people is not the best thing right now for nobody. It's pretty sad. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that we learn from this again and
Yeah.
recover.
Do you see, just from what you know about it, what key improvements do you believe need to be prioritized in aviation safety and transportation planning to prevent future accidents?
Well, definitely, I think that the technology is important, but also how do we implement this technology so that it serves the people that are using it, right? We have so much technology nowadays, and now AI is a big thing, but the human behind it has to be able to control this, to not have. And I think that we talked about this junk in, junk out, right? We
Yep.
have to know what we're working with, and we have to know that even though we have these powerful tools, there's still a human behind it that has to understand how to control all this information and how to process all this data. So the technology behind it, I think that we have to look at what the processes were on what the load is on the area as well. This is a very active airspace, right?
Yeah.
And then there's others like this around the country. It's not the only
Hmm.
one. So let's look at what we have right now. Is it working for us? Are we cutting corners? Are we really just having too
Mm.
much on our plate, or is it just because we overlook something, right? There's no skipping steps and there's no shortcuts. So I think that right now, what they're looking into or should be looking into is the process and the standards that we have. Do we have to revise them? Do we have to go back to basics? Like I said, when we were looking into maintenance, because sometimes we get really comfortable in our jobs, and that's where error comes in. And
Mhm.
there is no room for that when we are in
Mhm.
transportation, less in aviation, right? So that's something that I would assume that now the FAA and everybody involved in is going to look at. because we have to avoid this and never have this happen again, and never have the fear that this can happen. I mean, again, there is no room for error in these situations.
Well, and I appreciate that there are smart people like yourselves that are looking at every detail of what happened and looking forward to preventing this from ever happening again and making changes. And I think, that's the only thing consistent is change. And so there's always another level, always a way to get better. And so the learning.
And I think when things like these happen, and let's just talk about also Puerto Rico and Hurricane Maria in 2017. A lot of the infrastructure that failed had been where it was many years ago, decades. And then you find that maybe this was not the best way that we built this, or maybe this wasn't the best design, or this was not up to code, but because we didn't have money and we didn't have the means to reconstruct it, we kept going with it. And then after the hurricane, we saw that severe improvements have to be made and redesign and reconstruction. And that's because of a tragedy like Hurricane Maria, where there were a lot of fatalities. More than 4,000 people lost their lives after the hurricane. Well, that's when things change, and that's when awareness is raised, and that's where action takes place. And it's sad, but sometimes these tragedies are the ones that impulse change, but also make sure that you look at what you have and be like, oh, this is not working. Right. And so it's unfortunate because something like what happened 3 days ago will make changes. It's like September 11, right?
Right.
All these tragedies change the way that we look at life, but also how we work, how do we design, how do we inspect, how do we proceed with our designs and with the way that we do our engineering life, our engineering work. It's sad, but it's sometimes that wake up call that we needed that unfortunately came in at a very just abrupt and just tragic way. So, but if you look at history, that's when we've woken up and said, oh, we can't keep doing that. We got to do this different.
Yeah. Well, Eileen, I so appreciate your time and you being on the Unleashed podcast. And I want to call out Wendy Koch, who actually referred you to me. So thank you, Wendy, if you're listening to this.
My sister.
Your sister. So, I know that Esther 4:14 is a verse in the Bible that has inspired you.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how that's launched your journey or affected your journey.
So when I was getting ready for that first press conference for the governor on December 7th, I was preparing my speech and I started researching and going online, and I pray a lot. That is one of the things that helps the juggling and helps the goal setting and the goal achievements. I pray a lot. I really do. That's something my parents taught me when I was born. So I have a lot of faith. So I was looking and I wanted to finish my speech with the faith that I have and how to summarize what I was going through and the amazing feeling that I was going through to the press, so that they knew this person is a technical person, but she's a human being, right? So I came across Esther 4:14, which says, you've been created for such a time, or perhaps you've been created for such a time as this. And what does that mean? It means that I was supposed to be here. I was created, and I didn't know, to be here. And I was the one chosen to do this. So why don't you believe it? Come on, if you're here. So that's been kind of my verse that has gotten me through. And my mom got me a book on Esther and her story, and I read that. And I had a friend that got me this little really nice bracelet that said the verse and said, oh, I have this for you. I got to give you this. And so it became part of my beliefs and my faith is perhaps I was created for such a time as this. And I believe I was. And even if you don't think that you are, you were the chosen one to do it. So might as well do a great job at it.
You were the chosen one, and therefore you were created to do the job that you are about to do and have done and will do. So I just love that. So that inspired me as well. And, as I was thinking about our listeners this morning who are inspired by your journey, you do give hope, you do give encouragement, you paint a picture of what's possible. So for our listeners who are listening and are inspired, what's one action that they can take today to drive change in their own career and communities?
Okay. I always say self-initiative. Don't wait until someone does something for you or tells you what to do. Because I think that I think back on everything that I've done, and I was brave enough to speak up, and I wanted to do things, and I didn't wait until someone came and told me, here you go. Here's this application for you to go to Disney. Here's your application to apply for NASA. Why don't you go talk to your boss about this job or this trip that you want to do? When I started at Kimley Horn in 2006, I told my boss I want to work in Puerto Rico. And he said, find me a job and a client there and we'll go. It took me 8 years, but I relocated to the island and managed the first Puerto Rico office that was outside of the continental US. But I told him what I wanted. I told him what my intentions were. And when the time came, they were like, okay, well, she's always wanted to do this, so let's give this opportunity to her. So I think self-initiative and that drive, you have to have that for yourself, and you cannot wait for others to care about your success. You are the one that's going to care more about your success, and you are the one responsible for it. Do not blame anybody else or count on somebody else that's going to make your dreams come true. They can help you. And I have so many mentors and amazing people in my life, but you are the one that's responsible first. You're the one, and that self-initiative has to be there.
Yeah. So inspiring, and it makes me just want to hang up right now and just go get it done, because I think of so many things this year that my son and I during the holidays did a virtual vision board, which was so cool. There's an app for that, which is amazing.
I love that.
I look at the goals that I have for 2025, and Eileen, you're so wise that if I just sit back, then this time next year I'm going to be looking back going, well, it didn't happen. So the only one who's going to make it happen is me. And so I just so appreciate your tenacity, your resilience, your transparency, your vulnerability, so many things, how you are leading Latinas, how you are leading women, how you are inspiring anybody who's going to listen to this podcast. So Eileen, I just thank you so much for your time and your commitment to just making everyone around you and everyone who hears your story better. So thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. This was great. And it's like you said, this is who I am. And I think that when I tell my story, this is who I've been, and I want to tell my story. I think that there's value there, and that I can help others. So that's why I do it. So I'm really happy that we met and that Wendi got us together. And I'll see her hopefully in the near future, because I love getting in touch with her and listening to everything that she's doing. But yeah, there is so much support that we can give each other. If it hadn't been for her, I would have never met you. So to the women out there listening, support other women as well and give them opportunities. Yeah, because sometimes we don't know all the potential that we have, and other friends see it in us and they push us. So go and push somebody today to be great.
Yeah, such good advice. And I think that's if I were to look back, that's one of the things that I would tell my 21-year-old self is the power of networking.
Yes.
And,
absolutely.
Building those communities and helping each other. I need somebody to push me sometimes. And, then I can help other people and partner. So those communities are just so important. So Eileen, thank you. And I look forward to the next time. And I also look forward to walking through your next season in your career and your journey. So excited.
Yes. Me too. It's a little scary too, but we're on our way.
Oh, you're great. I can't wait to hear all the wins and failures that you're learning from. And so, I would love to have you on a future podcast to hear how this next season goes and your next learnings.
Let's do it in Puerto Rico. Come over here.
Oh, let's do it.
We'll do it at the beach. Yeah, we'll do it together here.
Thank you, Wendi. Tomorrow.
Yes, I'm here. Have an awesome year. Yes, have an awesome year, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And to our Unleashed listeners, thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed with Wendi Swanson. Make sure to subscribe and follow to be notified when the newest episodes of the podcast go live. Please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps others discover Unleashed and join our movement of forward-thinking leaders. You can find contact information and important links in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode, and remember, keep leading with authenticity, embrace change, and choose to live life unleashed.